What is up, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Control Freak Podcast. I am your host, Alex Blackard, on Twitter as Les Alex, and this is the only Magic the Gathering podcast devoted to all things Control in the modern format. So if you enjoy casting Jace the Mind Sculptor, snapping back surgical extractions, or casting Rest in Peace out of your sideboard, this is the podcast for you. And if that's not your thing, stay tuned, listen to this podcast, because it might learn you a thing or two on how control mages think and how we plan to attack the decks that you like to play. And if you would like to support the podcast, the only way to do that at this point is really to just tell your friends, tell your fellow Magic the Gathering players, share it in Discord, share it on Facebook, and really just spread the word via word of mouth. And if you really, really want to help out, follow me on Twitter, retweet any time that I tweet about the podcast, and go to Apple Podcasts. Even if you don't have an Apple account, go to Apple Podcasts, give me a 5-star review, and say a couple of kind words about the podcast, leaving a simple, short, couple sentence review about the podcast. That goes a long way with helping out the analytics over there, and it just looks good. So if you enjoy it, those are the ways that you can help support the podcast at this point. Today, as you might have guessed by the name of this episode, it's episode 4, Who That Hogaak. We are talking about mainly Hogaak and this new HogaakVine deck, but also we're going to be talking about other cards from Modern Horizons that are impacting the format already. In episode 1.5, named Modern Horizons, I went over most of the cards that I thought would impact Modern and have an impact against blue-white control. All the spoilers weren't out yet, so if you go back and listen to it, obviously there are some notable cards that I didn't mention. Hogaak actually was one of them, so that's kind of awkward. But today, we will be going over some of the lists from the 5.0 deck dumps, and there was a Modern challenge within the first couple days, and this deck was like the worst, best kept secret ever on Moto. There were a lot of dredge players, a lot of good dredge players that flipped over to this deck and just downright didn't want to play dredge. So we will be getting into the Hogaak, is it Hogaak, whatever, HogaakVine deck, and we will be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about other new and exciting cards and decks from this new set. And if you do go back and listen to the episode 1.5, I kind of got to brush my shoulder off. I kind of called my shot. This format, Modern, that we know and love, will forever be changed, because I don't care if only 25 of these cards end up making an impact. Like I said in episode 1.5, you don't just inject the format with a whole bunch of new cards designed specifically for the format and it ever be the same again. With that being said, I do think that Control is in a good spot because of War of the Spark, and of course we did get Force and Negation in the newest set. And there are some other toys that we have at our in our arsenal now. So the way that this episode, though, is going to work is I'm going to do a weekly news, kind of just overall news segment about Magic the Gathering. And then we're going to get into the Modern Horizons portion, talk about some brand new decks that have popped up over the last couple weeks. And then I'm going to have specific cards that I definitely think you should be playing, how many Force of Negations, how many sideboard graveyard hate spells in the 75, and that will be kind of the breakdown from here moving forward. So, and I will tweet out my 75 the 75 that I would be playing if I were playing in a SCG or an NRG or a GP, I guess a Magic Fest, coming up this week if I were playing in a big event. So if you are playing in a big event, definitely follow me on Twitter. Remember, that's @LessAlex, and kind of get the inside scoop of what I would be playing if I were to play. So yeah, let's get into it. Weekly news. So the London Mulligan, for a lot of LGSs, is here. So if you are unaware, current Mulligan rule is the Vancouver Mulligan. So you draw your 7 cards, you decide you want a Mulligan, you go to 6, say you want to keep, you look at the top card of your deck, and then you scry it so you can put it on top or bottom. Now the new London Mulligan, which they tested at Magic Fest London, Pro Tour London, is a bit different, a little bit better in terms of games that don't really count as games. Like if your opponent or you mulligan to 5 and just brick on lands, you keep a 1-lander and brick on lands, that's not really a game of Magic. Now, R&D and I guess the rules committee, whoever it may be, I don't know exactly who made these changes, like specific people, but they decided that wasn't really fun Magic, and I tend to agree. So the new London Mulligan rule is every time you mulligan, instead of going down a card initially, you will get to draw 7 cards. So say you mulligan once. You mulligan, draw your 7 cards, and then choose one of them and put them back at the bottom of your deck. Once you've decided that you want to keep. And then you continue that process each time you mulligan. So say you mulligan twice, you put 2 cards back, and so on down the line. Now, what a lot of people are saying, though, is that this really, really helps combo decks. Now, I tend to agree it does, but not to the same degree that I think a lot of other people do, just because, okay, so say your Tron opponent, and there's a lot of controversy over whether that is a true combo deck or if it's a control deck. I know a lot of people think it's a control deck. I tend to think it is a combo deck. Anyway, say they mulligan to 4 and they keep Natural Tron with Karn liberated. You know what they don't have in their hand? Any way to interrupt your hate spells. So as blue-white control, if we get to mulligan to 5 and we keep, Field of Ruin, or, best case scenario, Field of Ruin Surgical, that's insane, right? So they don't get their hate spells. Or, you could also draw Ceremonious Rejection or any of the big mana counter spells. So, Force of Negation, anything like that. So though they get to find their combo, yes, that is true, they don't get to find the disruption that they normally would. So yes, I see the complaints about it just being very good for combo decks. But at the same time, they don't get their hate spells. So I definitely think that London Mulligan is actually a good thing. It will make less non-games, which I'm a fan of. I like Magic. I like playing more Magic. So the fact that this allows me to play more Magic is excellent. Now, this doesn't come into effect. It doesn't come into effect 100%. It's only at regular rules level enforcement and under, until the release of Core Set 2020. So, in a couple of weeks, it'll be live. But as of right now, it's just regular and under if the store wants to do it that way. I know a lot of LGSs around St. Louis have adopted the London Mulligan already for like FNMs and just random modern tournaments and stuff like that. So it's definitely something to practice too. Also, on the London Mulligan. It takes a whole heck of a lot more experience and knowledge of the format to mulligan with London, because the fact that you, the player, get to choose what you're putting back and it's not just left up to the magic gods, that is very skill intensive, and I definitely appreciate that. Putting back cards, deciding, do I put back my counter spell, or do I put back my oust? Do I put back my negate or Dovin's veto, or do I put back my surgical? Like, these decisions that you make even before you've started the game, could make a huge impact on the games, because if you end up keeping a hand that, if you end up putting back your Path to Exile and keep your Dovin's veto, you're not going to get to path that turn one play. So, it definitely is much more skill intensive than randomly drawing one less card and scrying. Scrying is skill intensive, but I think putting that one card to the bottom is a little bit more than just randomly drawing one less card each time you mulligan. Now, we did have so that is the London Mulligan, but we did have a 5-0 MTGO deck dump here recently, and I am going to talk about that. That is going to transition us to the impact that Modern Horizons is having on the format right now already. I mean, like I said in the intro, the worst, best kept secret of the format was this HogaakVine deck. In the very first Modern Challenge with Modern Horizons in it, there were 10 decks in the top 32. 10 of these HogaakVine decks. So, if you're unaware of what I keep calling it Hogaak, it's Hogaak, Arisen Necropolis does. It is a Hogaak Arisen Necropolis 5 and hybrid green-black for a legendary creature avatar rare. It's an 8/8. You can't spend mana to cast it. It has Convoke and Delve, and you may cast Hogaak from its graveyard, and it has Trample. That's a lot, so you can't pay mana for it, but this deck is designed to, if you remember the Bridgevine decks from 5 months ago, that were like red-black, it played Vengevine, so you could never actually cast it. Well, guess what? This deck can play green if it so chooses, but the one that got second didn't. It also plays Altar of Dementia. I'm sure many of you know what Altar of Dementia, but I am going to read it off for those that don't. Altar of Dementia, a 2-mana artifact, rare, sacrifice a creature, target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of their library into the graveyard. So basically what it does is it gets a Carrion Feeder out or a Stitcher's Supplier, hoping to hit Bridge from Below, and I'm going to read Bridge from Below off to Bridge from Below. Triple black for an enchantment, rare. Whenever a non-token creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, Bridge from Below is in your graveyard. Create a 2/2 zombie creature token. When a creature is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, if Bridge from Below is in your graveyard, exile it. So if this enchantment literally doesn't do anything when it's on the battlefield. So the way that the deck works is you want to fill your graveyard with Vengevines and Hogaaks and Gravecrawlers and Bloodghasts, and then get an Altar of Dementia out and start sacrificing them, and bring back, and then of course generating your zombies, because Bridge from Below is in your graveyard, because why not? And then Hogaak, you can delve and convoke all of those out to make a giant Hogaak, and then you sacrifice all the things you delved, and then you get more tokens and more tokens. Basically, this deck can put 100 power, 100 100, I sound like Dr. Evil, 100 power on the battlefield on turn 3. This deck is insane. This deck is very scary. But how in the world do we beat it? Well, in this same Modern Challenge that, well, remember, first Modern Challenge of Modern Horizons new format, you know, and it's almost like Hogaak broke the freaking format because, again, there were 3 in the top 8 and 10 in the top 32. That's insane. And it's not like the deck was really well known. This deck was shared a little bit in the Dredge, the Dredge Facebook group, I believe, and then an image surfaced of the deck list on Twitter, and then a couple of people picked it up. It's not like a lot of people were playing this deck. The conversion rate was insane to make top 32. So it's not like, you know, a known quantity like humans or like Grixis Death Shadow. This is a small amount of people playing almost the same exact list, converting to a top 32. So conversion rate is very important when you're discussing how good or how broken or how strong a deck is. That is something I definitely want to stress. It's not like a million people in this tournament. It's not like most of the people in this tournament were playing this deck. However, in the same, it got second. This deck did get second. Nidewides got second. First place, however, Soul Strong, first place, Modern Challenge. Let me just read you off what cards he was playing, what they were playing in their deck. 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 Narset, Part of Reveals, 1 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, 1 Teferi, Time Raveler, 4 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Vendilion Click, 1 Oust, 2 Supreme Verdict, 2 Cryptics, 1 Dovin's Veto, 1 Factor Fiction, ding ding. There's a card that is from Horizons. 2 Force Negations, another one from Horizons. 1 Logic Knot, 4 Opt, 4 Path to Exile, 1 Spell Snare, 2 Surgicals, a Detention Sphere, and your normal suite of lands, including the 25th of Blast Zone. So, yeah, Blue Eye Control actually ended up defeating HogaakVine in the finals, which is excellent to hear because it seems like no other deck in this tournament was able to really stop or even slow down HogaakVine. So let's take a look really at what helped this player. Surgical Extraction, of course, ×2 main deck. That's huge. I think that might be the norm now, everyone. I really do. I was very hesitant on moving Surgical to the deck's main deck because Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa wrote an article. Oh, it might have been even last year, maybe even the year before that, but the statement that he said is still true to this day. It is the most overboarded card in Modern because you can bring it in reasonably against almost every deck. Like, you can bring it in against humans, you can bring it in against control. Hitting a key card of theirs is very it seems strong. It seems strong. However, I just wasn't a fan of playing Surgical main deck just because it creates games where you just don't have a card that affects the board at all, and we really need to have things that affect the stack or the board, and this card typically, well, it doesn't affect either. Now, ripping one card out of their hand is always a nice feeling, but there's no real reason, no real way other than Vendilion Click to do that in blue-white. So his sideboard played 3 Rest in Peace. 3 Rest in Peace, okay? And a Celestial Purge, which of course exiles. So 3 Rest in Peace sideboard, 2 Surgicals. That's how the West was won. That is how he was able, that is how Soul Strong was able to take down this Hogaak deck. So I really think we are in a place in Modern at this point in time where we need a lot of sideboard hate. I would even say as this deck, HogaakVine, gains popularity, we are going to have to put in more and more sideboard hate. Do I think that Hogaak and Altar of Dementia were mistakes for the format? I'm not sold. I do want to let the format kind of correct itself, but I know at this point I can say there are a lot of decks that use the graveyard, including Blue-Eye Control. We are definitely not innocent in this, with Snapcaster Mage. But the fact that some decks are playing 5 to 7 graveyard hate spells in the 75 seems like it's warping the format. Now, again, I don't want to talk about bans just quite yet, but I will say if it does come down to either Altar getting banned, Hogaak getting banned, or Bridge, I think those are the targets. It's going to be a black eye on Modern Horizons. I mean, Wizards created this set with Modern in mind, and they know what Altar does. This Altar of Dementia is a card that in Commander is used for combo decks. That's what it does. I mean, you just mill your opponent out. And Bridge from Below, a card that is very strange card. It doesn't actually do anything. You get no value out of it when it's on the battlefield. So the fact that it even has a casting cost, is kind of irrelevant. And then, of course, Hogaak, which is the new hotness, and the reason that this deck is doing what it's doing. I mean, Dredge, this card basically has Dredge. It doesn't, but it does. Convoke and Delve. We already know that Delve is an extremely powerful mechanic. We got Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise banned because of how strong they are, and those are 7 and 8 mana spells. This is a 7 mana spell. So, and an 8/8 Trampler that you can get out on turn 3. So this could be a problem, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of these 3 cards end up getting banned. Of course, Faithless Looting has been talking about, players have been clamoring for it to get banned. It's just interesting to me how Phoenix was the hot button a couple of weeks ago, and now Hogaak comes out, and now no one's even talking about Faithless Looting. But it is showing up in this deck, of course, helping out any and all graveyard decks. So HogaakVine, again, 10 copies in the top 8. 10. That is insane. The third place deck I do want to talk about was the Eldrazi Tron. So this is, if you don't know, of course, Karn the Great Creator with Mycosynth Lattice. That was another card that people are all in a tizzy about. Luckily against Blue-Eye Control, if your opponent is going for Lattice, they're in a very commanding position already. So typically players playing this style of deck don't often go for Lattice unless they're about to seal the deal anyway. So because a 6 mana artifact at sorcery speed is just typically we're going to have an answer for it, especially now with Force of Negation. But this deck is still right there in the thick of things. It originally kind of popped up about a month ago with a Nerd Rage 5K, one of their championship qualifier tournaments. So definitely be ready for the Eldrazi Tron. And I think honestly this deck is probably a good matchup for us. Unless they have a blistering hot like Eldrazi Temple into Thought-Knot Seer, this deck seems like it's probably a good matchup for us. In 4th place was HogaakVine. In 5th place was Arclight, mono red Arclight. So no copies of Lava Dart in this one, though there was a blue-red version in a recent 5-0 deck dump that did play Lava Dart. So Lava Dart is definitely popping up and making its mark. Then we have Humans, which is pretty stock, other than a card I do want to touch on. It plays, again, this is a very stock list. You have all the usual suspects of Champion of Parish, Kitesail Freebooter, Mantis Rider, Meddling Mage, Noble Hierarch, Phantasmal Image, Reflector Mage, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Thalia's Lieutenant, Aether Vials, and then a bunch of lands that don't really ever cast spells. So Ranger Captain of Eos was a 2-of in this deck. It got 6th place. So Ranger Captain of Eos, of course, was a card that I said would definitely see play, and specifically I said it would see play in this deck. Ranger Captain of Eos, 1 and a white creature, human soldier, mythic, 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you get to search your deck for a creature CMC of 1 or less. So just like Ranger of Eos, except for you don't get 2, you just get 1. So in this deck, it's searching up things like Champion of the Parish and Noble Hierarch, but that's not really why you love this card in this deck. The reason you play this card in the deck, I believe, is because of its second ability. Sacrifice Ranger Captain of Eos. Your opponent can't cast non-creature spells this turn. Holy smokes, this card is pretty good against us, and because of this card, we definitely need to be playing, in my opinion. Now, this hasn't been very popular so far, but I think the more play, and Ranger Captain of Eos has seen play in another deck that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the cast. We need to play more Settle the Wreckages, because typically what they're going to do is they're going to go find their dude, and then they're going to sack it during our upkeep. And then we can't Wrath. And really, what these decks really come down to, these matchups like Humans comes down to, is just us surviving one more turn to land that Haymaker, or being able to resolve a turn 4, which would be what turn it is if we were on the play against Captain of Eos, a turn 4 Supreme Verdict or Day of Judgment, or Wrath of God, things like that. 4 mana Wraths, basically. But I definitely think that having Settle the Wreckage to do it on their turn is very important. Now, of course, that could be a norm, and then Ranger becomes less good because they know they're playing it. I've had a lot of success with Settle the Wreckage. It's really catches people off. And then in 7th place, we have another Bridgevine deck, HogaakVine. And then here is the other deck that I wanted to talk to. This is in 8th place, so the final spot. Jesse Samick is the username. This is Esper. This is Esper Death Shadow. So this deck, it plays 2 Teferi Time Raveler, 4 Death Shadow, 2 Gurmags, 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigies, 3 Ranger Captain of Eos, 3 Snapcaster Mages, 2 Street Race, 2 Inquisitions, 1 Lingering Souls, which is very good against us, by the way. Lingering Souls is very, very good. 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Unearth, a Dismember, 3 Fatal Push, 3 Path, 3 Stubborn Denials, and 4 Thought Scours with some lands. Now, Unearth, another card from Horizons, another card that is seeing play, and Unearth is very good against us. Being able to buy back Death Shadows, or Jace Vryn's Prodigies, or Ranger Captain of Eos, or Snapcaster Mages, all for 1 mana, and being able to cycle a late game when you don't have any of those in your bin, is very strong. Is very, very strong. Ranger Captain of Eos, of course, showing up as a 3-of in this deck. Very good. Very good. I hadn't even thought that you could, that hadn't even crossed my... Maybe I did. I don't remember. Go back and listen to episode 1.5. Tell me if I mentioned Death Shadow or not. But Ranger Captain of Eos going and finding Death Shadows and then stopping you from wrathing seems insane. Seems very good. we definitely need to be ready for Ranger Captain of Eos. Again, I definitely think that the remedy is things like Settle the Wreckage, because people just, again, will not be playing around it. So Esper, and again, this isn't the only Esper Death Shadow deck that either this top 8'd the Modern Challenge, which is huge, but another list went 5-0 on a competitive league. So next we have just normal good old fashioned humans, which literally doesn't have anything new. So there's that. And next up we have another HogaakVine in 10th. Then we have mono blue. This is blue-red Narset. So this is basically Blue Moon. So playing Blood Moons, Narsets, Cryptics, all the usual suspects. One thing that I do want to point out is it was playing Magmatic Sinkhole. So this is a card, again, that wasn't spoiled at the time of the recording of episode 1.5. Magmatic Sinkhole. I want to call it Magmatic Stinkhole. But that's not what it's called. It's Magmatic Sinkhole, 5 and a red for an instant with Delve. Again, another Delve card here showing up, but this just does 5 damage to target creature or planeswalkers. So definitely something to look out for. Not quite nearly as busted as Hogaak, but being able to dome one of our planeswalkers for 5 mana is very important. And this could be something that I've seen. This is something that the blue-red Phoenix decks are starting to pick up as like a 1 or a 2 of, because dealing 5 damage to any creature pretty much kills any creature in Modern. Now, it doesn't exile, so there's that, but we don't particularly care about that too much. But dealing 5 damage to our precious planeswalkers is big game. And again, this is blue-red moon, I guess you could call it, or blue-red Narset. Blue moon, I guess, is what they call it typically. But yeah. And then moving on down the list, we have this really interesting blue-white spirits list that's playing. Again, this isn't all in the Modern Challenge. This is 12th place at the Modern Challenge. Sarah the Benevolent. This was a card that I thought a mid-range deck could play. This is a card that I thought that in the correct meta, blue-white might want to play one of these, the new Planeswalker. So that's very interesting to see. There's only one copy, but 12th place at a Modern Challenge. That's definitely something. Moving down, we have another HogaakVine deck. Then in 14th place, another one. HogaakVine. Basically, no one's playing Dredge. No one is playing Dredge because of Hogaak. And then in 15th, so 13th, 14th, and 15th are all HogaakVine. All HogaakVine. So next up, we have Tron. So good old mono green Tron coming in. And it got 16 plays, so top 16. It's playing, of course, the new Karn the Great Creator package with the Wishboard of Ensnaring Bridge, Liquid Metal Coating, Trinisphere, Phyrexian Metamorph, Mycosynth Lattice, Grafdigger's Cage, and Crucible. So that is something to look. I mean, Tron is already a bad matchup. Having access to Crucible of Worlds from their sideboard and Grafdigger's Cage, and eventually I suppose that they could, and of course Trinisphere, they could lattice you late in the game. That's not great. I mean, it's this matchup continues to be a problem for blue-white control. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they're kind of a slow deck, and if you keep them off of Tron and all of this. No, it doesn't matter. Because of how little pressure that we have and how little damage that we do, Tron is always a problem because eventually they do just draw 7 lands and resolve a Karn, or, they get to Ulamog, or they make a Worm Coil or a Walking Ballista. This deck is still very strong against us, playing 3 Relic of Progenitus main. I mean, it attacks us from so many angles. It's really hard to keep up with Tron to this date. And the Wish board with Karn the Great Creator is still very, very big game. Moving down to 17th, we have a Delvar deck. So this is blue-red Delvar. Delvar's finally here. It has 4 copies of Delver of Secrets. Now, this is not a new card, obviously, from Modern Horizons, but it is definitely worth pointing out. Delvar hasn't really found footing in Modern since it's been in as old as Delvar is. That's how old Modern is. So Delvar and Modern kind of run hand in hand in terms of how long they've been around, and Delvar's really just never had a good foothold in the metagame, but this might change that. Again, this is 17th place, so 4 Delvers, 4 Snapcaster Mage, 2 Vendilion Clicks, 3 Young Pyromancers, 3 Serum Visions, 4 Archmage's Charm, which is a card that I was definitely looking into, but the fact that this deck plays 5 islands and no mountains, there's not a single mountain in this deck, lets you play Archmage's Charm 100% of the time on turn 3. So that's pretty good. It plays 1 Burst Lightning, 2 Cryptics, 4 Lightning Bolt, 2 Logic Knot, 1 Magmatic Sinkhole. Again, Magmatic Sinkhole showing up as a one of, 2 Mana Leaks, 4 Ops, 2 Spell Snares, and then a Fairy Conclave, 1 Flooded Strand, 5 Islands, 4 Deltas, 4 Karns, 4 Spire Bluff Canals, and 3 Steam Vents. The fact that it doesn't play the new Horizon Canopy land, the Fiery Islet, is interesting to me, because that seems like something you'd want. Now, maybe they just thought they didn't need it, or maybe they just didn't have it in the collection. That's very possible, I suppose, but I definitely would recommend playing that in this deck. Seems like an easy inclusion, because most of your spells are less than 3, other than Cryptic, which they only play 2. So this is a deck, though, that we need to be prepared for. I think it's probably decent. This could give us fits because they play a tempo game, and if they get to Logic Knot and Mana Leak us out of the game, it's definitely possible. So maybe we up on our Dispels in the sideboard. But that is a deck that definitely popped up and is very, very eye-catching. Moving on, we have Burn, just good old-fashioned Burn. And it doesn't even play any Sunbaked Canyons, so there's that. And then we have another blue-white control deck. Let's take a look. 2 Jace, 3 Narset, 1 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. So electing to not play any Teferi Time Ravelers main. 4 Snapcasters, 2 Clicks, 1 Oust, 2 Verdicts, 1 Timely Reinforcements, which I am a very big fan of. 2 Cryptics, 1 Factor Fiction, 2 Force Negations, 2 Logic Knock, 4 Opt, 4 Path, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Surgicals, and 1 Detention Sphere, along with 24 lands. Now, something very interesting here is the fact that they're playing snow-covered basics, and they're not really playing the payoff on Thin Ice. I think that on Thin Ice is actually pretty good. I read an article that kind of explained that, Oust is kind of not great. Kind of not great. The downside of on Thin Ice being an enchantment, there's not too much enchantment removal in main decks other than in the green-black decks. But on Thin Ice could definitely be something that we play. Now, in the sideboard, I do want to point out that this player opted to play Winds of Abandon, which is a very sweet card that it looks amazing, and we're calling it Path of God because it exiles target creature you don't control. For each creature exiled this way, its controller searches their library for a basic land, puts them onto the battlefield tapped, shuffles their library. But you can overload it for 4 white, so you can do it to all of their creatures. It's a Plague Wind. It is a white Plague Wind at that point. So pretty great. I'm definitely wanting to try Winds of Abandon in the board. And then we have Allosaurus Rider combo. Now, keep in mind that this was not with London Mulligan. So, very scary stuff. 20th place, we had Allosaurus Rider combo. And then we had Is It Phoenix? And 22nd place, we had Mono. Oh, this is blue-white. Oh, this is just blue-white control. They're playing Wrath of God. That's what threw me off, is the art on Wrath of the God on... Okay, so Wrath of God, yeah. 1 Ashiok, 1 Jason Mind Sculptor, 1 Narset, 2 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 2 Teferi Hero of Dominaria. So, see, that's what I love about blue-white control, is there's so many ways. This is the most... non-stock deck that has the most creativity, for my money at least, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. It is the most unsolved deck in Modern, because every single list you see is just massively different from the next, from one to another. This one not playing any Force of Negations main, none in the 75, so yeah, I mean, this deck looks sweet. It is playing a main deck Winds of Abandon. I'm here for that. Got 22nd. Not too bad. And then we have another HogaakVine. Another HogaakVine. Then we have a Baral Storm deck. Let's take a look. Does it play anything new or spicy? Aria of Flame. So the new enchantment, 2 and a red. Rare enchantment. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent gains 10 life. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a verse counter on Aria of Flame. It deals damage equal to the number of verse counters on it. So this is 2. This is a pretty big inclusion, because for the longest time, Storm has been a pretty stock deck. So the fact that Storm, even though that new green card Weather the Storm was a huge jab at them, but the fact that Aria of Flame is finding a home and taking down 25th place on a Modern challenge is very, very interesting to me, and definitely something to be aware of. So definitely want to be bringing in the Celestial Purges against them now. That is something that kind of in the past against Storm, you never really knew, because if they didn't play Blood Moon, you didn't really want it. It wasn't really great. Now, if that becomes the norm and they're playing Aria of Flame, you definitely want to bring in your Purges out of the board. In 26th, we have this really sweet blue-black Tesserator deck. Playing 4 Lilianas, 2 Tezzeret the Seeker, 4 Tezzeret Agent of Bolas, 1 Walking Ballista, 4 Collective Brutality, 3 Damnation, 3 Inquisitions, 2 Thoughtseize, 4 Ensnaring Bridge, 2 Pithing Needle, 3 Relic of Progenitus, 2 Talisman of Dominance, 1 Richbane Orb, and 1 Search for Azcanta, along with 24 lands. This deck is just, it seems to be just like old school Tesserator. Nothing really new in the main deck. In the sideboard, you have Ashiok Dreamrender and Shatter Assumptions. So that's pretty sweet. Shatter Assumptions, if you don't know. A colorless 2 blacks for uncommon sorcery. Choose 1 target opponent reveals his or her hand. Discards all colorless non-land cards, or target opponent reveals his or her hand and discards all multicolored lands or cards. So very, very good against the Eldrazi Tron deck, I'm sure. Probably great against humans as well. And then we have one of the blue-red Days Undoing Narset decks. Deck's very sweet, playing 2 copies of Force of Negation. Ancestral Vision, Days Undoing, Temporal Mastery, Time Warp. So no Echo the Aeons, though. That's very interesting to see that. 28th place, we have Blue-Red Phoenix with nothing really new going on here. Not even playing Fiery Eyelet. And then we have another Blue Moon deck in, what is this, 29th place? In 30th, we have Grixis Death Shadow. Kind of very, very stock. No new cards. And 31st, we have... This looks to be... Okay, so this is... Okay, so that's just humans. There is a new humans deck, and in 32nd place, rounding it out, who else but Hogaak? HogaakVine is in 32nd place. So, moving on, as I was writing up the show notes for today's episode, I was scrolling through Goldfish, and I saw that Canister was playing a deck named UBR, so Blue, Black, Red. When I clicked on it, holy smokes. This thing is spicy. Let me read it off to you. 4 Goblin Engineer, 2 Psymaster Thopterus, 4 Urza Lord High Artificer, 3 Whir of Invention, 4 Mishra's Bauble, 4 Mox Opal, 1 Grafdigger's Cage, 1 Nile Spellbond, 2 Pithing Needle, 2 Pyrite Spellbond, 1 Damping Sphere, 1 Grinding Station, 2 Sword of the Meek, 4 Thopter Foundry, 1 Ensnaring Bridge, 1 Arkham's Astro Blade, some land, and then 20 lands. This is it. This is it, folks. This deck, and Canister, obviously very, very popular streamer and Magic player. So the fact that he figured this out, or I don't know if he necessarily figured it out, but this deck that he 5-0'd a league. This is a league. This was the most recent deck dump, the 5-0 deck dumps. Goblin Engineer, if you didn't know, this was one of the cards that I didn't get to spoil or talk about because it wasn't spoiled yet. Goblin Engineer, 1 in a red, a creature Goblin Artificer for a rare, 1/2 is its power and toughness. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card. When you do, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. And then as an activated ability of red and tap it, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So in this deck, you get to play all of these artifacts, right? You get to play Baubles and Opals and Grafdigger's Cages and Pithing Needles and Pyrite Spellbombs and all of these artifacts that cost less than 3 mana. So Goblin Engineer seems like a great card to put in here, and I'm so excited that Urza has 5-0'd a modern league, because this deck seems super sweet. I enjoy the philosophy behind these Whir prison decks, because they have such utility. At any instant, they can pivot and go and grab. As soon as they go and grab any card out of their deck with Whir of Invention. And now with Goblin Engineer, it just gives them another cheap way to kind of have a Whir style effect. So I dig these decks. This is definitely something that, Stony Silence is back on the menu. Grinding Station, of course, it does have the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry, where you can just go infinite, sacking a Thopter, bringing Sword back to the battlefield, auto-attaching, sacrifice it, go infinite. And with Urza, all of these artifacts become Mox Sapphires. You can create infinite mana and infinite tokens if you have Urza, Sword of the Meek, and Thopter Foundry on the battlefield. This deck seems very sweet and very good. So we definitely need to get ready to face this. So I definitely think that Stony Silence is back on the menu. I know our decks have been trimming them down to as low as 1. If this starts to pick up in popularity, start getting ready to play more and more Stony Silences out of the board, because this deck has big game if it gets going. And Goblin Engineer is awesome. I mean, the card is great. People are calling it the new Stoneforge Mystic. Goblin Forge Mystic is what one of my buddies calls it. So that deck is very sweet. I definitely wanted to mention that. That's by Canister. Amazing, amazing player. And then this next deck that I wanted to point out. This is something new, but something old. Champion, so it's Jeskai Humans. So in all of those lists and all of those other versions of humans, none of them really played Unsettled Mariner. This one plays 3 copies along with 2 Kessig Malcontents and even 1 Restoration Angel, 3 Giver of Runes. So even though Giver of Runes is a core cleric, they're still using her to protect all of their creatures. So it looks pretty stock other than the fact that it does get to play, because the mana base is much better, it gets to play Lightning Bolt. And then, of course, Kessig Malcontents is an oldie but a goodie that they just started cutting and not playing. Now they get to play it because, they're playing red. And, they're actually casting it and using actual lands. This deck did utilize Fiery Islet, 3 of them to be exact. And it gets to play Sunbaked Canyon, which is insane. It's got 7 of the Canopy lands. So this deck seems very, very good. I mean, having Giver of Runes in a humans deck seems like big game. Though, granted, I think our game against this deck is pretty good. I mean, Unsettled Mariner and Giver of Runes do make it a little bit more awkward to cast our 1-mana removal spells on it. But generally speaking, humans is a pretty fair matchup for us, pretty good matchup. Lightning Bolt doesn't really affect us that much. And definitely Unsettled Mariner and Giver of Runes, though good against us, I think our matchup is still pretty good. Especially if you're playing a deck that plays 3 to 4 Wraths in your 75. So that deck is very sweet, though. Jeskai Humans. I do want to, before we leave this section of the show, I do want to do a brief breakdown of the metagame. I like to do top 5 metagame percentages as on MTG Goldfish. So in first place with 7.82% of the metagame is humans, just standard humans, the normal humans, the 5-color humans. In second place with 7.11% of the metagame is Azorius Control. Mama, we made it. Let's go. Azorius Control, finally at the top tables. This deck's sweet. It's the whole reason you're probably listening to this podcast. So in third place, it's 6.26% of the metagame is it Phoenix. In fourth, 5.26 is Dredge. And in fifth place at 3.41 is Mono Green Tron. So I do think that these will start to change here in a little bit, because I do believe that the Hogaak deck is real. I believe that the Esper Shadow deck is real. I would like to believe that this deck that Canister 5-0'd with is real. It just takes a second, right? It takes time for the metagame to adjust. I do think Urza, I said it in episode 1.5, I think Urza was going to generate a brand new deck. I know I'm not a visionary or anything like that for saying that, because the card is just so very obviously busted and good. You just need to get the right shell, and I think that Canister, this is a great starting point. And I hope that players build on it and improve it, because I like seeing new stuff in Modern. That is, I love Modern, and when it gets stale, it's not great. So right now, we got a bunch of new decks, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. I don't know about all of this Hogaak nonsense. I guess we can say that, we got some pretty great silver bullets against them. And, London Mulligan definitely helps with that. So I'm very excited for all of that. But yeah, that's about it. Let me get to, so how many Force of Negations would I play right now? I said it before I said it again. I'm going to say it now. 2. I would play 2 main deck, maybe 1 in the sideboard if your meta is combo heavy. And then how many graveyard hate cards? No less than 5. You got to play. I am on the train. I am now the captain of the train, saying 2 main deck surgicals, because these Hogaak decks, these other blue-white decks, Tron has obviously always been around, and now this Grixis Whir deck with Urza in it, using Goblin Engineer, that is a good thing to help fight it. So I definitely like having 5, and then of course having 3 Rest in Peace, maybe even 4. I've seen a couple. There were a couple 5-0 lists that I didn't mention that were blue-white that played up to 4 copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard. So I mean, if your meta is heavy Hogaak and graveyard decks, maybe playing 5 sideboard or graveyard hate cards is the correct play, but definitely 5. Would not leave home without at least 5. But yeah, that's about all I have for this episode. Thanks, everyone. This was episode 4 of the Control Freak podcast. And if you enjoyed it and you want to help support it, again, just tell people. Let people know that this podcast exists. I am doing this because I love blue-white control, and I want to share any kind of information with the blue-white control community that I can. I love the deck. I love the metagame. I love that we are finally in a place in Modern where we're starting to be taken seriously. There was always the behind the back jokes. Oh, you're playing blue-white control. That's cute. Oh, you're playing a Celestial Colonnade deck. That's like a Guildgate. Come on. No, we're finally here. We're the second most represented deck in the format. This is something to treasure and be excited about. Mama, we made it. We're here. This is the Control Freak podcast. Again, I am Alex Blackard on Twitter as LessAlex. Give me a follow. We can talk about Magic. We can talk about blue-white control. We can talk about sports, or we can share memes. It doesn't matter. Let's just interact. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you like it. I hope you tell your friends about it. And I will see you next week. Episode 5 will be on the menu. Everyone, have a great night, and I do want to say Happy Father's Day to all of the fathers. I am recording this. It's a little past Father's Day, but when I started recording this podcast, it was Father's Day. I am a father, so I definitely appreciate all the people that told me Happy Father's Day, and I give all of the hashtag MTG dads out there Happy Father's Day. You are awesome. And yeah, be kind to one another, Magic players. Talk to you next week.